Good morning, and welcome to this webinar on Brexit and standardization, arranged by Danish Standards. My name is Maria Skov, and together with Torben Dalsgaard and Pauline Terbager, I'm the host today of this webinar. For the introduction and the framing of this webinar, I will hand over to Pauline, who, due to certain corona testing restrictions, is not with us here today physically. So over to you, Pauline.
Thank you, Maria. Good morning, everybody. My name is Pauline Terbager, and I'll introduce the speakers for you this morning and give you some practical information about the webinar. It's one of a series of webinars that we have launched from Danish Standards to make up for the corona restrictions and the consequences it has for our normal meetings. I'm sure you're all looking forward to hear our guest star today, Richard Collin, Head of European and National Policy from British Standards Institution, in short BSI. Richard will speak about the consequences of Brexit on UK participation in standardisation, the new UK CE mark, and the BSI perspectives on what's to come. Richard has been working for BSI for many years and has been very involved and very busy the latest years to prepare for Brexit and to try to secure that European standards can still facilitate the trade between UK and the EU. We've had the benefit of working together with Richard in SEN and Senelec on a number of issues regarding the effectiveness of the organizations and how we can improve the interaction between European standards and regulations. We look forward to continue our cooperation, even if it might be in a different and new way. We also have two Danish perspectives. One is from Mette Pitsgaard from the Confederation of Danish Industries. We had the pleasure of working together with Mette on many issues regarding standardization and especially harmonized standards and different policies from the European Commission with regards to the citation of harmonized standards. Mette is very active also at the European level, presenting European industries in Orgalim and Business Europe. Finally, Mette is the chair of the advisory board to Danish Standards, Standardiseringspolitisk Forum, as we call it in Denmark. But to begin with, Maria Skov, Head of Department in Danish Standards, will present to us an introduction to the different types of standards we're working with and the decision that has been taken and still are to be taken in Senelec as a consequence of Brexit. Maria has just been elected for council in ISO, of which we're very proud. We've seen a tendency for Europe losing influence in ISO the latest years, but this year 2 European seats were won in council and we're very happy about that. But first, before we start, I'd like to say a few practical words. The webinar will last for 1.5 hours in total, so we'll not be able to discuss specific standards or fields of industry. We'll focus on standards for products and not go into detail on certification and tariff, import measures, and so on. Many things are still unsure, and therefore this webinar is intended to convey the current status and what we know will happen in next year in 2021. We do not know the full picture yet. Also, the webinar will be recorded and will be made available on the DS website. We encourage you to ask questions in the chat box during the presentations, and we'll be able to answer some of them between the presentations, and in the end, we do have time for Q&As. We would like to ask you to write your questions in the chat box below the window with the webinar on your screen. You can write in Danish or English, but we'll answer in English. My colleague Torben Dalsgaard will keep track of the questions and we will try to answer as many questions as possible. Also, if there are specific questions and requests for follow-up, we'll contact you individually afterwards to make sure that we answer your questions in the best possible way. But for now, I'd like to give the floor to Maria Skov, Head of Department at Danish Standards, who'll introduce the standardization in the light of Brexit. Maria, over to you.
Thank you, Pauline. Thank you very much. My introductory presentation will focus on 2 things mainly. A helicopter perspectives on why standards are important and what role they play in relation to the European single market and the EU legislation. And secondly, I will give you an overview of what we have done in the European standardization organizations called CEN and CENELEC in order to prepare for the Brexit. So I will just shift to this one. This is just to remind us all why we are engaged in standards and why it makes sense. These figures are based on an international study made in 2018 and with more than 1,000 companies involved. And you can see in general, they consider that standards are beneficial for their business. And I will just highlight two important figures. You will note that 69% considers that standards simplify the exporting of goods and services. That is good. Standard is a good tool for trade. Secondly, 87% considers that standardization is important for their future business plans. And this shows us actually that businesses use standard as a tool to obtain their strategic priorities. So today we are talking about Brexit and Europe and standards. So why is it that European standards are so special? They are because they in essence form the backbone of the European single market. They do so because once adopted, one European standard replaces 34 different national standards. And once a European standard is agreed upon, all standards body must adopt this and withdraw national conflicting ones. And additionally, we should not forget that they are voluntary and that they are used as market tools in many different aspects. The Harmonized Standards is a special story. It's a sort of subset of the European standards, and they form this unique link between European legislation and products in the single market. And they can be used by companies and manufacturers to give what we call presumption of conformity. That means showing that their products live up to the, for instance, safety requirements as they are set in the directives and regulations. Based on this, the manufacturer can put the CE mark on their products and then market them in Europe. So the system is transparent and predictable, at least so far. And today we talk a lot about Europe and harmonized standards, but we should not forget that Brexit will not influence the use of international standards from ISO and IC. And that's why I have put the 5 logos below on this slide, so you can see that Danish Standards is actually a one-stop shop for all the international as well as European standards. And we work with an aim to ensure to the highest degree possible that we see alignment between the international and the European standards, because that's good for business, it's good for consumers, and global trade in general. So this slide just shows us the importance of international and European standards and how it has developed over the years. We can see clearly that the use of European and international standards increased steeply from 1985 and around that time, mainly due to global trade and the introduction of the new approach and the single market in Europe. And correspondingly, the number of national standards decreased rapidly. In Denmark, we have less than 2% pure, or what we call homegrown standards, as DK is an open economy and export-oriented. The same picture is actually seen all over the world, and especially in Europe, although it differs from member state to member state, mainly because of the size of the country. So for instance, Germany, as well as UK, have a higher percentage of pure homegrown standards. So one thing that is really important to note, and that may be confusing for some from time to time, is that standards are not legislation. It is important to remember that even though harmonized standards can provide solutions for compliance with relevant requirements in the European legislation, the so-called presumption of conformity, which I mentioned earlier, these standards are still voluntary to use. Manufacturers and companies can use other means to show conformity, and they can use the international standards as well. Standards are developed in a consensual way. We have all parties around the table if they want to. That is not the case with many other standards organizations around the world. And they're independent of the European member states, but we are designated by the EU Commission so we can support the legislation. Standards are also revised on a regular basis, so they keep being state-of-the-art, so every 3 to 5 years. And they provide a number of technical specifications in, for instance, performance, interoperability, compatibility, safety, and so on and so on. On the other hand, we have legislation. It is mandatory, and of course made and implemented by national authorities. They are revised when the legislators decide, and they often set requirements for public safety. We have to bear in mind that UK in the future will have the right to set their legislation as they want, independently of the EU. So we as a standards community, we have to wait for a political decision in the negotiations before we can really decide on how to best adapt to the situation. We don't have direct influence. We are on the other side, so to speak. So just to pin it out a little bit more, we're talking about Brexit and Europe, and we should remember that the definitions or the differences between legislation and standards are also defined in member states, standardization, and EU combination. So you can see in this slide that the national authorities set the legislation, and they do that in many cases in accordance with European legislation. But they also designate the standards body to be the one in the country. So in Denmark, Danish standards is designated the national standards body. This role is notified to the EU Commission, and through our membership of CEN and CENELEC and ETSI, this unique public-private partnership, we can actually develop standards used for the internal market. And this partnership is described and set in the regulation called 1025. And as I have already mentioned, harmonized standards are then the direct tool to link to European legislation. And there's also an obligation to report to the EU Commission if you have a member country who is not able to adopt a given standard because there are conflicting national laws. That is what we call an A deviation. And of course, we wish to keep as few A deviations as possible in the standards world. So now I have tried to outline to you why BSI, the British Standards Institute, and UK are intrinsically connected to European and EU through standards. This is of course not the only way that UK is closely linked to us, but it's not the most visible area, but it's still very important. Now let me turn a little bit to the processes that we have been doing in the standards world. Now, Brexit is not a new thing. It has been looming over our heads since 2016. And preparations have been long and cumbersome for everybody, also for us in the standards world. This is a timeline of what we have done so far, with actions from the EU Commission, the UK government, BSI, and CEN-CENELEC respectively on this chart. I will highlight 3 main points in this timeline. One is June 2018. Here, the General Assemblies of CEN-CENELEC, who is the highest authority in these independent organizations, they decided to set a transition period for BSI's membership until end of 2020. And they also initiated an analysis work in order to identify the criteria to be met by BSI if they wanted to continue, and we wanted them to continue be a member after the Brexit. The next one I want to point to is June this year. Here, we decided at the General Assembly to extend the transition period so that BSI could stay member with their current rights and obligations until end of 2021. The last one I want to mention is June next year. And here, this analysis work that I mentioned, it will continue. It has been continuing since 2018. And the aim is that we at the General Assembly next year will agree on revised bylaws. And this will include a monitoring and escalation mechanism to be sure that BSI lives up to the principle in the European standardization and they meet the criteria for this expected new type of membership. Again, it is important to keep in mind that the UK and EU negotiations are key to the decisions that we make in CEN-CENELEC. So the working methodology in CEN-CENELEC is the following. We, of course, assume that there will be a deal between EU and UK. We hope so, but we are prepared for another scenario. Our understanding is that even if a larger deal is not reached by the end of this year, there will be solutions emerging early next year. Goods and trade will not stop abruptly on 1st of January. So there has to be some kind of deals, even though they will come in small parts. And the interesting thing right now is that standards are not high on the agenda, but they play a vital role. As already mentioned, BSI is a member of Sensenelec until end of 2021, and they will participate as usual in the development of standards. And on technical votes, BSI is already from July, 1st of July this year. They are now counted as a non-EEA country, meaning that they vote with the same technical voting rights as Turkey. And last, I can mention that this analysis work that we have been doing, it involves all stakeholders in the landscape, and we have also legal advisors to help us prepare for next year. So what will be decided at the 2021 General Assembly in Sensenelec? We anticipate that there will be a revision of the bylaws and a new type of membership that makes a BSI membership possible. The new rights and obligations will include voting for standardization requests, what we call mandates for the Harmonized Standards. It will also include voting procedures for standards in general, how to hold secretariats and chairmanships, and so on and so on. And the aim is, of course, that we want to enhance the robustness of European standardization system by keeping standards aligned between UK and EU. We also want to safeguard the Sensenelec recognition as European standardization organization. It is important for us that we keep the link to the European legislation, and that we keep the ability to help companies live up to the requirements set in the European regulations. And of course, we want to make sure that there are no technical barriers. We want to strengthen the single market that is implicit from what I have said. And last but not least, we want to keep BSI as a member in our community because they are important and they do a great deal of work. So my final slide is just to touch upon some challenges if we look a little ahead. Richard will in a minute talk much more about CE and UK CE-mærkning, which is sort of following on what I have said. But I think if we look at how manufacturers and companies will operate, they will be in both markets. And it will give some problems in citation of standards because it will be asynchronous between, or there will be asynchronicity, that's a difficult word, between UK and EU. So when does one standard take over from another? That can be a potential problem. Misalignment of standards. Will we see a number of A deviations increase? We don't know. We want to keep them low, as I have already mentioned. If there's going to be new legislation or revision of existing legislation, this is also a moment of truth to see if there's true alignment between EU and UK. And timing will be different anyhow. So we, meaning the standards community, of course we wish that legislation and standards also in the future will go hand in hand to safeguard technical harmonization across Europe. And we have to see if that will actually happen as we go forward. And with these very open questions and challenges, I think I have finished my presentation, and I thank you for your attention, and we will now see if there's room and time for a small question.
Thank you very much, Maria. As mentioned in the presentation, my name is Torben Dalsgaard. I'm in charge of the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. I can't do that by myself, so I need your help. I need you to get active on the chat, answer some questions. We will try to answer as many as possible on the webinar today. If you would like to give us the opportunity to answer the questions afterwards, you have to type in some kind of contact information together with the question. Then we will write or call you back on this. So we have some questions already. I think I would like to start with maybe Pauline. Maria just talked about the process, and Sensenelec gave us a timeline, gave us an indication of different decisions that need to be taken. But Pauline, maybe you could enlighten us in how is the Danish standards position in the membership of BSI and their role in Sensenelec. So, Pauline.
Yes, I'd like to do that. it's a difficult situation, and I think for everyone it's really hard to maneuver and to find out what can we do. And as Maria said, a decision between, or an agreement between the EU and the UK is paramount for us to know what to do next. So we've been observing, we've been investigating and analyzing, and I think for us in Danish standards, we find that the UK market is really important for the Danes. And also in general, in standardization, we have a lot of very good experts from the UK participating. We have BSI hosting a lot of secretariats. So it's a big resource that we would like to keep in the system. On the other hand, we want to safeguard the Senelec organizations. We want to be sure that they're stable and that they do have the credibility they need to underpin the functioning of the single market. And the single market in total is, of course, larger than our export market in the UK. So we try to keep this balance, and we simply have to wait a bit and do scenario analysis to find out what to do, really. So our position is to try to keep this balance. Yeah, I think that's it. But we'll develop also the position ongoing, and we have not seen clear signals from the Commission or for the EU from Danish member states either to say we cannot live with this situation, or you have to do that in standardization. So we'll of course also hear what they say and how, and that will also influence our position. But that will come later on, I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pauline. I think we have time for another question before we hand it over to Richard. I can see there's already coming in a lot of questions, and some of them I don't want to answer right now because I think they will be addressed in the upcoming presentations. But we have a question here regarding your presentation, Maria, and this is about what do we mean with the differences in citation between EU and UK? And
I think you can answer that.
Yeah, I think I can. What we mean about that is the citation process. It cannot. It's impossible to be aligned. We see right now at the moment that in EU and the Commission we are struggling to getting the harmonized standards cited in official journal, and we do not foresee that it is possible to have a 100% parallel track going on with UK. So there is most certain going to be a difference in the timeline from when a standard is cited in official journal and when it is cited, or as Richard is going to mention it, designated, as the UK is calling it. And this could imply that you would have different transitions periods. And if you are producing products for both markets, that will potentially shorten the transition period for manufacturers. So I hope that that was addressed. Then just a quick one, and I don't know, Paulina, are you still with us? Because maybe you could answer this one. Is it still possible to have working group conveners in Senelec? And I think we could fold this question out and say, what is the technical body structure for Senelec regarding the BSI membership?
Yeah, and I think Maria mentioned it briefly in her presentation, that the decision now is that because we don't know what will happen between the member states and the UK, we have taken a decision in Senelec to say that throughout the year 2021, there are no changes. Well, there's a bit of changes in the voting, but apart from that, BSI will be able to continue the work in Sen and Senelec as we're used to. So you can definitely have conveners and the whole system you're used to for the period of 2021. We don't know what will happen after that, but that will be decided at the plenary in June, probably 2021.
Thank you so much, Paulina. I think this is it for questions right now. Just to remind you, we are having a Q&A session at the end, so keep the question coming as they pop up on top of mind. We will collect them to the end of the webinar, so keep typing the questions. Yeah, and I think we're ready to our next presenter, Richard Collins from BSI.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Morning,
Richard.
morning, morning. Good to see you. Good morning, everybody. A great pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you this morning. I shall put on my slides, and I think that will go. And I hope that's visible to everybody now. So thank you very much, as I say, for the opportunity to talk to you. It's a real pleasure to be here and to have this chance. It would obviously be a greater pleasure to be with you in Denmark, but unfortunately at the moment, of course, we can't do that. I'm going to talk to you about the standards aspects of EU exits, but in fact, much of the presentation will be putting that into context. So that's the context of how the UK market will function post-transition period, and what that means for product regulation, for marking, for conformity assessment issues. We've all heard a great deal of noise about EU exit over the last 4 or so years for the UK. A great deal of noise about whether it's a deal or no deal exit last year, twice, or this year, once, and then of course exit in January and followed by a transition period, and now deal or no deal noise in the run up to the end of the transition period in what is now just under 4 weeks' time. And all of this noise has been accompanied by huge political turbulence, as you will be aware, in the UK. 2 prime ministers have finished their jobs. Huge divisions in our society that are far from open. There's still significant anger on both, or maybe more than 2 sides, but on all of the sides there's still significant anger, and issues about the UK market structure, issues about UK's trading relationships, both with Europe and with the rest of the world, the concerns of businesses, concerns of consumers, and some of these things I've put on the slide here. And within all of that, we have our part of the world where we work in standards, and there are the issues that I want to bring to you that fit within this bigger picture. Now, I have to start, and Maria has already, I think, mentioned, or Pauline, some of the caveats that we're working to. The presentation that I give, and it will be public, of course. It's based on our current understanding, and is given in good faith. And we know that the UK government and the European Commission, the EU, are working towards a deal, trying to find a way through to a deal. And what's in this presentation may, of course, be overtaken by what's in that deal, or at least to some extent. And so the assumption that we have to make, that I've made in creating this presentation, is that the transition period would end without a deal in place. So this is the default position that I'm outlining here in this presentation. So it might be that there is more alignment than this to some extent. Nevertheless, I think that much of what is in this presentation is already set. It's set in regulation and is ready to go in 4 weeks' time. To say a word about BSI. BSI, the British Standards Institution, we are the UK's national standards body, so we're in a similar position to Danish standards. We're a private company, we're not part of government, and therefore that's why some of these caveats are important. I can't speak for UK government. We're not responsible for regulation. We're a standards body. We bring together consumers, businesses, and others to make standards. BSI also has other parts of the business that deal with conformity assessment, testing, training, and so on. And again, I'm not speaking for those parts today. I'm working the standards part of the business, and that's the perspective from which I'm speaking. So to start with this big bit of context that I'll give you before going into the standards position. The UK market structure is of course very, very particular, very special for the way in which our company is organised. And where we are in January is that, of course, we're removing this layer, this overarching layer of EU regulation that in some ways has maintained the market within the UK for many years. And the removal of that single market legislation needs to be considered with a view to the way in which the 4 separate nations within the UK function, and the fact that we now have what is called the UK internal market, which is a new phrase for me, but the UK internal market will be for these 4 nations. It will be the basic underpinning mutual recognition and non-discrimination principles of the ways in which those 4 nations work together in terms of market regulation. The intention is to try to keep trade as friction-free as possible between those 4 nations, recognizing that quite a number of powers have actually been devolved to the administrations of the different nations there. So that's the first layer, an underpinning mutual recognition, non-discrimination internal market. On top of that, we have a second layer where a considerable amount of legislation, and in fact all of the product safety and similar legislation, is reserved to the UK government. So it comes out of London and it applies equally to the whole of the UK. Now, you can see this, as I do, in some way analogous to the position of member states in the EU, because you have countries agreeing to harmonise for the whole market and basing on mutual recognition where there isn't harmonisation. So you see a similar picture to that, but that underpinning has had to be created in UK law recently. Then there's a third layer which adds additional complexity, and that third layer comes from the EU Withdrawal Agreement signed between the UK and the EU at the start of the year, and that is intended to make sure there is no hard border on the island of Ireland. And what that means is that post-transition period, so in 4 weeks' time, while the rest of UK, Great Britain, that's Great Britain, England, Scotland and Wales, will be outside the EU single market definitively, Northern Ireland, for a certain number of pieces of legislation, will remain within the EU single market. And that is the case for the product regulation that I'm mainly talking about today. That's the case for all of the CE-mærkning regulation. So there will be a division in the overall UK market between what you see for Great Britain and what you see for Northern Ireland. So there are some levels of complexity in terms of the UK market that, as businesses who may be importing into the UK, it will be important for you to understand. So here is the focus of what I'm really talking about today in this contextual part: product regulation, the CE-mærkning product regulation in particular. So I'm not talking about REACH or automotive or cosmetics, but it's the CE-mærkning regulation, lifts, machinery, electrical equipment, measuring instruments, medical devices, gas appliances, and toys, and so on. And what's happening in the UK is that product regulation is being brought into, converted for a UK only jurisdiction. And because of the structure of the UK market that I mentioned, that's being done in 2 ways. It's being split between Great Britain, GB, England, Scotland and Wales, where we will have this new product regulation regime, the UKCA regime, replacing the CE-mærkning. And then Northern Ireland, about which Northern Ireland crops up a lot in our conversations because it's such a special case. But I won't say so much about it today. It's in the slides. I will leave it in the slides, but I won't say so much because it's a relatively small part, but very important. Northern Ireland regulations will continue to align fully with EU law. So this work has been done by UK government according to a specific policy direction that they set early last year in relation to the possibility of a no-deal exit. And that policy decision was that all existing EU regulations will be brought into UK law identically, with the exception of anything that needs to be done to make them operate in a standalone jurisdiction. So you have the full UK legislation, and you take a slice off that where there are references to the European Commission has this power, or there's a European mark or European assessment or whatever, and then that part is switched into a UK only part for Great Britain. And so in relation to the CE marking regulations, with which no doubt many of you are very familiar, what we'll see is identical essential requirements in 4 weeks' time in Great Britain for UK CA marking, and the identical route to assess conformity, the same modules as we've seen in the EU NLF for years. But for the parts that would not operate in a standalone jurisdiction, you see a new product marking, that's the UK CA marking. You see changes to conformity assessment bodies, which I'll mention. And you see changes to the process of recognizing standards for regulatory conformity. So that's in the EU, that's the Citation of Harmonized Standards, in the UK, as I will say, designation. There's quite a lot of guidance available on this. There's guidance available on the government website, and at the end of the presentation, there are a number of links here. And very importantly, while this comes into force, the UK CA marking comes into force for Great Britain in fact, from our side, it's the 31st of December, from the 1st of January next year, there is an exemption for products legally meeting the CE marking, which can continue to be placed on the market to the end of the year, some exceptions in particular regulations. So this identical conversion of EU law to UK law. I won't say much about this slide because it'd be too small to read, but what I hope you can notice from that is that a number of these UK regulations, whether they're transposing or whether the transposing regulations, are quite old. And that reflects the fact that, of course, where there's a directive, so the Machinery Safety Directive, that was brought into UK law in 2008, those provisions are already UK law. They have been UK law for 12 years. So no change in those provisions. But all of these regulations have had to be amended for the UK CA part, for the approved body part, and so on. So it's the same regulations, the same essential requirements, the same conformity assessment modules, but with changes to enable it to work in the UK alone. The regulated conformity assessment for the UK CA marking, there will be a new category of bodies that perform that third-party function within the UK CA marking regime for that legislation in Great Britain, and they will be called approved bodies. All UK notified bodies will become approved bodies from the 1st of January. EU notified bodies will not be recognised for UK CA marking unless they are specifically have applied and have a specific recognition from UK government. And in return, of course, UK notified bodies will not be recognised for CE marking for the EU. And so I'm sure a number of you have already been through this position of moving a notified body or continuing to use what was a UK notified body, which has moved to be an EU notified body. There's been quite some movement there. But it's important to recognise about the validity of the certificates from notified bodies from the UK, from the EU, and how that plays out with UK CA marking regulation from the 1st of January and CE marking regulation for the EU. There's an exception for Northern Ireland. That's mentioned in this slide as well, because there's an additional marking. It's possible for the Northern Ireland market only to continue to have a CE marking on a product, but also accompany it with the UK NI marking when a UK notified body is used. That's a very specific exemption for Northern Ireland only. It's not, it does not enable market access in the EU. But if there are particular questions on market access in Northern Ireland, then that needs to be checked out specifically. There are a number of different issues about how things will work in Northern Ireland based on the fact that it will continue with the CE marking for the future. This slide shows us with some greater clarity the differences in the markings for the different markets from next year. So for the EU market, of course, you know well how that works. That continues in the same way. CE-mærkning, self-declaration, or an EU notified body, not a UK body, because they will no longer be notified bodies, although it may be a UK company that's moved its operations such that they are still an EU notified body by one of the member states in Ireland or Netherlands or wherever. Then for the GB market, from the 1st of January, UK CE-mærkning, self-declaration, or a UK approved body. But for the first year, and for 2021, CE-mærkning also permitted where the product is legally CE-marked, and separately then for Northern Ireland as well. And from 2022, CE-mærkning for the EU, UK CE-mærkning for Great Britain. There are a few points that I would like to make, just to bear in mind. I think these are things that where we've had a number of questions. So firstly, products can bear more than one marking. It's within the CE-mærkning rules, and the UK government has said that there's no problem in a product bearing a conformity marking for a different jurisdiction, and therefore you can have a CE and a UK CA, provided they've met the conformity assessment rules behind it. They can have both markings on them. That's not a problem. Of course, nothing must be put on for the EU market that would confuse in relation to the CE marking, but the UK CE-mærkning is a separate jurisdiction, so that's fine. CE-mærkning recognised until the end of 2021, and CE-mærkning with a UK notified body is not legal from the 1st of January. So if you're placing a product on the GB market using a UK notified body, that would need to switch immediately to the UK CA regime, or indeed switch notified body. There are some important things about Northern Ireland to remember, that some things are slightly different, and in particular that the UK CA marking, you can mark your product to meet the requirements of the UK CA regulations, but that alone is never sufficient for the Northern Ireland market. The Northern Ireland market will require the CE marking. Okay, well, I think that's enough in terms of context of the regulatory model and the market structure in the UK. I'd like to talk a bit about how that impacts upon standards, and then talk about standards more broadly. So Torben mentioned about citation of standards, and this, of course, is an important part of how these CE-mærkning, UK CE-mærkning in the future for Great Britain regulations work. And in line with the government policy of bringing everything over into the UK to start from the 1st of January, what UK government will be doing from the 1st of January is designating all of the currently cited harmonised European standards for the UK market. So there are currently about 3,500 cited harmonised European standards that give normally a presumption of conformity with the CE-mærkning regulations or similar regulations. And so provided the UK has brought that regulation across, and there are a couple of regulations that are much more about internal single market affairs, and so are less important for a standalone market like in Great Britain. Apart from those, all of those standards will be designated on day one, on the 1st of January. So where you have, say, however many hundred standards there are cited for the machinery directive, all of those will be designated exactly the same versions for the UK market from the 1st of January, meaning that if you want to meet the identical essential requirements to enable the UK CE-mærkning in Great Britain, you will use the identical standard to get presumption of conformity. So full designation of exactly the same standards. And that designated standard will give a presumption of conformity. Now, this, of course, is a government regime in the same way a citation of harmonised European standards is for the European Commission. This designated standards regime is for the UK government. BSI as a private company and as the national standards body, our objective is to help UK government to deliver their functions for the market. So what we will be doing will be supporting government in terms of the designation of standards, and in particular, what we'll be doing through next year, when we expect that these regulations on machinery, electrical equipment, EMC, toys, and so on, will continue to be identical. We will provide information to our Department for Business that manages this process to tell them when new harmonized European standards are coming through the standard process, and then informing them that at the point where they come to ratification, such that government can then designate the new version of the standard. So that request for designation to UK government, that proposal for designation, will run in parallel to the proposal for citation that goes from Senlec to the European Commission. That does not mean, unfortunately, and as mentioned already, that there will be a guarantee that the same standards are designated at the same time as they are cited in the EU, and that's something that we certainly can't guarantee. But we will be doing our best to maintain those lists of standards the same, and UK government wants to make sure it designates the latest version of the standard that's being used by business. That designation is done by the Secretary of State in the different ministries, and all of the information will be published on the gov.uk website. Now, I talked before about the presentation being out of date, and what I heard after preparing this presentation yesterday evening is that UK government has now released its guidance on designated standards. I don't think it's released the list of designated standards yet, but the gov.uk website now contains guidance on what designated standards are and how they will work. So that information is not in the links at the end of this presentation because it's newer than the presentation that I finished 2 days ago. But nevertheless, that information is now available, and I can give I can give colleagues in DS
Richard,
the links back on later.
Richard, can you hear me?
Yes, Maria, hi.
You have to wrap up in 1 minute or so. I know you have a couple of slides left, so if it's possible, maybe to skip some of them and move on. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks, Maria. So there are the important points I wanted to make still remain, but I will do those quickly. What we know is that we don't expect automatic alignment between the UK and the EU in the future. We will make sure that we manage changes that are necessary for UK law. Our stakeholders are very clear to us about what they want. They want to stay as close as possible to the standards regime that works right across Europe, because they're interested in market access across Europe, not just for the UK. There are some very important things for us in BSI. We're interested in these 4 top points here very much: enabling supply chains, enabling market access through a common set of standards, making sure that those standards are driven by stakeholders, those that want to make the standards, making that international first wherever possible through ISO and IEC, and enabling that through SEN and SENLEC, so we have an identical set of standards we work on together, and doing that within a coherent and consistent national catalogue. Of course, we support UK government, and we recognise there is already flexibility within the standard system to enable that support to UK government. And so then this, as the final substantive slide, is where we see our position. And this gives me a positive outlook. Our role is to serve the needs of UK stakeholders through our role in international and European standards bodies. So that means we work alongside you and DS and the other standards bodies, working together to serve all of our needs as stakeholders. We do this through our international memberships and through our European membership, and that we look to continue. At the same time, we support the autonomous regulatory policy of the UK. But those things are not necessarily incompatible, and we can work together to make sure that the international standard is used wherever possible by business, even if there are small differences for the different regulatory regimes. I've mentioned about SEN and SENLEC membership, so I will, and Maria has talked in much more detail about this. So I will wrap up with just this slide that shows some of the organisations with which a number of you may well be familiar that work with us in creating the BSI position. This is not a position that we've created on our own, and I think it's very important for all of the standards bodies to talk to their industry, their consumers and others to understand what their needs are. What are the needs of the market in terms of standards? That's where our position comes from. And so I'd be really interested to hear the views of Danish industry and other Danish stakeholders that may be on the call, and indeed to continue the conversation. So sorry for overrunning, Maria. This slide just gives more information, so it's for later, and I will finish with that.
It's excellent, Richard. Thank you so much, and sorry for interrupting you. You did a great job, and I think you did a fast forward introduction. Really nice, and I will give the word to Torben, who will take one question, and then we'll proceed with Mette from Confederation of Danish Industries.
Yeah. Thank you a lot, Richard. Strong combat there. So I think we have time for one question before we hand it over to Mette. I reckoned a question coming again in different forms, different perspectives, but it's basically circling around the same issue. And maybe it's obvious now that you had made your presentation finished, Richard, but it's about, is this only about CE-marked products and well, CE-marked products, they can be restricted or regulated to have other markings such as the veje marking or energy efficient. So I don't know, Richard, if you could elaborate just a little bit on that question.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think the first thing to say is that this definitely isn't only about CE-marked products. In fact, this is about all standards that are used by business right across the board. So we have 40,000 of those in our national catalogue. I'm sure it's very similar in Denmark and elsewhere. And most of those, of course, have no relationship to regulation whatsoever. The ones that link to CE marking is under 10% of our national catalogue. And so the rest of them, they're not directly linked to regulation. There may be some regulatory links, but not normally directly linked to regulation. And so the use of those standards, that's for businesses to decide how they work together. So that's great. I think there's no question about us continuing to work together on those. In relation to where this links to regulation, now, of course, this isn't our decision within BSI about how this works. This is a government issue for how regulation aligns or doesn't align, but certainly within the UK CE marking area, we've done a lot of work there. For other markings, I think what I'd like to stress, as I wanted to stress, and maybe I forgot during the presentation, is that it's important to look at what the actual regulations say, because there may be slight changes if things move over to the UK that may not be exactly as you would expect. And so please check in the regulations. UK government's been putting out a lot of guidance. I'm not familiar with how it works for the veje regulations and others. The principle will be the same, that it was brought over identically, but there will be changes in how it actually operates in the UK. So please check the specifics of the regulations and take the best advice you can.
Thank you so much, Richard. I have a sense that you could talk about this the whole weekend, but unfortunately we framed the webinar for an hour and a half. Thank you so much, Richard. I think we will leave the floor to the next speaker, Mette from Danish Industry.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to be here today and talk to you about what our experiences has been at the Confederation of Danish Industry with regard to challenges on Brexit and how we have helped out to help our member companies comply with whatever happens. And I must say this has been a very, very long journey of uncertainty. You all know that we had the referendum back in 2016, and when we started to do meetings in 2017, we had to cancel them because nobody wanted to know anything about it. Of course, we didn't know so much, but we have run through a journey where we cancelled meeting to we now are at a stage where we are being called upon every hour, basically, because now people understand now we need to act. And we have had deal, no deal, transition period, and now we are waiting for the trade agreement. We don't have it yet. We hope to have it, but we don't know. There are cliffhanging scenarios, and of course it's very difficult to prepare for what you don't know what is. The key issues that we have been involved with at the Confederation of Danish Industry, that has to do with import, it has to do with export, it has to do with services and employees, it has to do with customs, of course, and then it also has done a lot to do with the transfer of data. Today, as the rest of the seminar has been around goods and the transfer of goods, so that will be the topic of my presentation as well. And the thing here that has been very difficult for the companies is really that Brexit impacts everything that a business does. And therefore, those who have been able to prepare is mostly the bigger companies who have been able to have support from the top of from the CEO, basically, to form some kind of organization that had to deal with Brexit and try to look at contingency plan, what happens not, and also had the capacity actually to overview all these things. And that has been a problem, and I think it's still a problem, because when we look at it, when we look at where are we, there are big differences in how companies has prepared. But before moving into that, just a few words about the DI position on this. We have been discussing, and it's not that much different from the one we have with Danish Standard, but I think I need to address it just a little bit. We look at the UK as a very important market. It's the fourth biggest trading partner we have in Denmark. But when you look at the EU, the internal market, it's almost, it's more than 50% of our exports. So therefore, of course, internal markets is more important than the UK, even though the UK is such a big market, as I said. So what's important for us when we talk about this is the level playing field within the internal market as our primary priority. And where we've seen it, and also where all the challenges has been in the negotiation, has to do with how can you secure the level playing field, and also when it comes to, for instance, the ability of countries to give state aids, which is far away from our common working environment. But I mean, it becomes important if British companies can have support from the state, and Europeans can't, then they have a better position to market their products in Europe. So it is high level issues that we don't normally deal with when we're dealing with products, but it's most definitely has an impact on what we're doing. I have been talking about a lot about the interest of the companies, where they come from, and as I said initially, we had to cancel meetings. But what we have done is we have been able to be involved at a very early stage, even before we informed outside, because of course, as a big organization, we have been involved with the ministries, trying to find out what should be the content of the withdrawal agreement, what should be the content on the trade agreement now. So at the political level, we have been very active all the way since 2016. And towards our members, it has been meetings, personal meetings, it has been webinars, it has been working with authorities to develop checklists, and traveling around the country. So a lot of information and websites and stuff like that. And the meeting today is one of many in that row of experiences. Then looking at preparedness. I said before, it requires kind of organization in order to be able to prepare. And what we have seen is that the bigger companies has been able to do it. But what you see on this slide is actually now we are still in a position where up to 50% of our membership is not prepared. Still, even though we only have 4 weeks to go and don't really know what happens. And if we look at it's a division between bigger and smaller companies. What we see is actually that the smallest and the smaller ones, those below 50 employees, we have in those groups up to 70–80% was not prepared. So we have a serious problem in trying to help the small companies prepare for Brexit at this point in time. I should also say then that, I mean, we knew from the beginning with the reason why the UK wanted to go out, that had to do with the services. So I can also say that we see in our survey that those who sell services, they are very much prepared. And also those who are in logistics and are in foods, they are also prepared more than production companies are. Then, yeah, maybe you could also see that with Richard's presentation. Have we had a lot of questions regarding standards? No, not really. I have not, yeah, maybe 5, I don't know. It's really not about standards when companies engage with us. It is about something else. And what it is about is very much what Richard spoke about. It has to do with the notified bodies. It has to do with the UK CE-mærkning that Richard was talking about. And it also has to do with the Declaration of Conformity. And looking at the first question, and the very first things that people got interested in was this issue about the notified body. If you had a notified body in the UK and you needed to have it in the EU, how what was needed in order to make that transfer possible. And of course, also, if you want to sell in the UK, how could you make the transfer going over to a UK notified body? It's my impression now that those who have prepared, they are pretty much set. There's been some issues about the requirements and whether you need to recertify and all that, but I think those were like the initial issues. Later on, we had the problem or the challenges around the UK CE-mærkning. When did you have to put it on the product? Could it be on an accompanying letter or on the packaging? And we know how straightforward knowledge of that. We know that you don't have to put it on the product from day one. You can wait a year, and then you can have it. You can actually have it on the accompanying paperwork or on the packaging. And we also know that you don't need to have the UK CE-mærkning from day one. You can wait a year. So there are clear indications, and as Richard said, it's all pretty well stated in the documents that the UK government has created. In terms of the Declaration of Conformity, the issue has more been, can you have both the UK information and the EU information on the same document? We know in the UK they will accept that you do a declaration of conformity where you first say this is in line with UK regulation and these standards, which are the designated standards, and at the same form also have the information from the EU. We don't know whether it's the same the other way around, so we're waiting for that. But I think the UK government has been extremely clear in trying to lay out what are then the status in terms of what you need to do when. What's very important when it comes to deciding whether you have to put the new UK marking on the products is really whether you have brought your product on the market, whether it has been placed on the market. That's the thing to know, that if you have products that has been placed on the market either in the EU or in the UK before the 31st of December, then you do not have to consider anything that has to do with these new things or the new rules, because they have been placed on the market and therefore they will be valid until it reaches its end user. And what's important in terms of placing on the market is actually that there has been a transition or a handover of the product in a commercial activity, not necessarily for money, but the commercial activity has to take place, and then the product has to be manufactured. It doesn't even have to be placed in Europe or in the UK, just as far as you have the agreement, you can prove it, and it has been produced. And then, of course, it's up to you to make sure that you can document that it is those specific products that has been placed on the market, because it's not just any product in a series, it's those specific products that has been placed on the market before the 1st of January 2021. Moving on, the other important thing that I believe Richard also spoke about is the issue about if you are a distributor now, then you become an importer. And of course, with that follows a lot of obligations, for instance, about how much you should look into the documentation in the Declaration of Conformity and how much you should check up, whether you should keep it, and also your responsibilities when you discuss with market surveillance authorities if they want to look at the product. That's one thing, and of course you need to find out what are those obligations in those specific regulations or directives that your product is covered by. That would be important, but and that's a change of this of the status of the economic operator that is important here. The other thing is then how to market, and of course. Right now, both in the UK and the EU, you need to write on the product who the importer is. Again, there I believe the UK government has been very clear. You don't have to put it on the product. It can still be on the accompanying documents or on the packaging. So that will help, and you can do that for the next 2 years. So you have a little more time to prepare for that. Another thing we then have experienced is actually that there's a lot of confusion within the companies, because there are the compliance managers, where I think most who are involved in Danish standards would be part of. And then you have the logistics customs people. And there's a lot of confusion about what are the requirements in terms of being an importer in the sense of customs and all these things, and what are the implications of being it in the sense of the product regulations. So I can imagine it must have, it will cause some confusions within the companies, and at least we have gotten a lot of questions about that. Moving on, Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is a special situation. Richard mentioned it as well. What we see is that what's not right, or not exactly clear right now, is what status Northern Ireland will have in the future if you're actually established in Northern Ireland. And it may be that it is a loophole or a way to get around to establish in Northern Ireland and then comply with the rules you have to do there, and then be able to sell both in the UK market and in the EU. It's not clear. It's a thing that we're discussing at very high level in different settings, and it's not really been possible for us to be absolutely certain about what the situation is here. But it has to do with what are the requirements to be established. What do you need to do? How many people do you need to be, and how is it? But that's one of the open things, and I hope that's one of the things, of course, that they look at in the trade agreement now also. But it has been partly dealt with in the withdrawal agreement, and now we see what happens in the trade agreement. The future of the designated standard. We heard that it's nice that we now know what the designated standards are. They have now been published, or at least how the process will be. That will help a lot because when you have to do your DOCs for the UK market, of course, then you need to have this information. As you don't need to apply it from the 1st of January, it's not that you need to do it immediately. You still have a year before you apply the UK CE-mærkning for most products. But it's good we have it, and that's nice. The problem, as we see it looking into the future, is actually that right now they are the same, but they might change. So if we get a new national regulation in the UK, and which they wanted, that's why they wanted to get out of the UK, then you will need to have some deviations. And how many will we get of those? And we see then the systems are falling apart. The second thing is really linked to the standardization challenge as we see it, the fact that it's very difficult to harmonize in the European system the international standards because they don't comply with the formal criteria and sometimes also on the content. And if the UK decides that they will actually use the international standards, which would be natural, then it would be a lot easier to go that way, and in that way the UK can be a market that's much more innovative and fast-moving than we have seen in the EU. Good for the UK, not so good for the rest of us, not so good for the internal market, and it might be a competitive advantage to the UK. We don't know yet. We need to look into it, but that's how we see it now, and I look very much forward to read the new guidance that has come out, and also what happens in the trade negotiations. So if we look at the DI position in terms of BSI, we hope very soon that we will get an agreement, so we know what the status will be. We would like them to be part of the standardization community. It's clear for everybody that the UK delivers a lot of very, very nice work into the system. And it will be a big loss for all of us if they move out. But we also need to secure this level playing field that we have been talking about before, and that's really the key. But we are very much looking forward to the trade agreement, and I'm sure that we will find a compromise, or we hope. And we know they're still working on it, and now the last thing I heard was maybe on Monday. So, but that has been an ever-waiting story. But that was everything I had to say now, and I'm open for questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we are on time. So maybe before we go to the Q&A session, I could just answer you a quick one, Madam. So you mentioned something about special UK benefits. Could you elaborate a little bit on what that might be and give an example?
Yeah, but I mean, what we see is when we look at trade agreements normally, we look towards greater integration. And now we have a clear signal from the UK, they want less integration. So one obvious thing would be that if you allowed, for instance, that UK standards would be allowed as a way to be in alignment with EU legislation. Obviously, we cannot accept that, but that could be one thing. Normally, when we have the trade negotiations and trade agreements, then you will go towards international standards. And as I also mentioned myself before, what we see is really that it could be an advantage to go towards international standards. But if the EU then cannot do it, then we need to fix the standardization challenge in order not to have this evil playing field. So there are certain things around trade agreements where you go for greater integration, where they want the opposite, and that's why we cannot just say, please come and do it like you want, because we see a clear signal that you don't want to take on board our standards at the same time, and we need to have mutual recognition of the standards on both sides.
Thank you, and a good point, I think. Okay, with that single question to you, I think we are ready to move on to the actual Q&A session. I've asked you to write questions earlier on. Please keep writing. If you want to give us the opportunity to answer them afterwards, please type in some contact information. It could be an email or something like that. I think I will also take the time to explain a little bit of the output of this Q&A session. It's our plan to take some of the questions we've received today and put those along with the questions onto our website. As many of you might already know, we have a lot of guidance material. We have a lot of material on the CE-mærkning, and we plan to make something similar on the UK CA market. And we can see on the registration for today's webinar that there's a need out there. I know the Danish industry is also doing a lot on this communication part. So this is what we actually want to use from this Q&A session. But I think we should get started. I think we already had a lot of good questions coming in, and I've noticed there's some of them that are going around some kind of the same topic. It's about the medical devices, and I don't know if you, Richard, is the right one to answer this one. But it's something about, it could be, we have an existing medical device directive, and it's to be renewed in the next year in EU. So how will, when you're talking about the medical device in UK, would that be the existing medical device directives, and how about, if yes, how about the new EU directives on medical devices?
Yeah, great. Very interesting question about medical devices. Obviously the timing has been difficult in terms of the implementation of MDR, that it wasn't implemented this year and put back to next year. That means that the MDR does not have to be implemented in the UK because it's after the end of the transition period. And my understanding, although I haven't seen, although the new UK regulations are not yet released, as I understand it, they were planned and then removed. My understanding is that the UK will not be implementing the MDR and will continue with the existing medical devices directive as implemented into UK law through the 2002 or whatever they are medical device regulations. So yes, that will give a challenge for us relatively soon to understand how standards support the MDR and indeed the UK regulations, which also is slightly inconveniently called MDR. But so yeah, that will be a challenge as of the middle of next year to see exactly how that functions, how standards will support those continue to support those regulations in the UK. So we're in discussions with our Department of Health, the Health Ministry, and the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency about how that will work, about how standards will fit with that. And what we see in this area is that actually it is the the area right across the SEN and SENELEC fields of operation with the maximum alignment with international standards. And so we don't expect that whatever UK government comes up with in terms of regulation, and they will be developing new regulation further down the line, that we don't expect that will move away from the use of international standards, which are already used within the SEN and SENELEC system. Yes, it's an area of challenge that we need to deal with, and we're in conversations with the government about what that means and how it works. And then, of course, we're also starting conversations with our stakeholders who work in the standards developing committees to see how that functions with the set of existing standards that works for the MDD and their switch over to the EU MDR, and how we can work with that as well. So it's not a fully defined situation, but that is going to be the first significant area of challenge for us to see how that works. Torben, I know you probably got lots of questions, but I wanted to come back on a couple of things that Mette said as well, if I may, or should I wait my turn?
No, go ahead, Richard. Go ahead.
Great. Mette, the two things that you said I wanted to mention. The first one was about the use of UK standards for compliance with EU law, and I think that what I'd like to say that to try to make it sound like it's not such a threat is that, of course, our standards, much as in Denmark, year on year, 95% of our standards are European and international, and so we're completely aligned with the standards that are used elsewhere within the SEN and SENELEC system, and so in these regulatory areas there aren't separate UK standards that meet these things, because that we would remove them because of the requirements of SEN and SENELEC membership. So I don't think that's in itself necessarily an issue. Now, of course we have to see what happens as time goes on, but I'd also stress that of course it's the EU's decision which standards to cite, and the EU will continue to make that choice, and the EU cannot cite British standards. They can cite European standards. That's what the regulation says. And so while it is possible now to use a British national standard if it exists, or a US standard, or a Japanese standard, in part of your compliance with regulation, because the standards are not mandatory in themselves, that decision will still stay with the EU about which standards to cite, and they'll continue citing European standards. So I think while there could be a concern, we need to put that concern into context. And the second thing is about international standards. I mentioned, and I only mentioned it briefly because I was running out of time, about the international first principle. That's the principle that we've worked on for years. That what our stakeholders tell us, what our industry tells us, is that they want one international standard that's used globally for trade, it's used in Europe for market access, it's used in Europe for regulatory conformity, and it's used in the UK. And that position hasn't changed. Now, there are challenges, and we see increasing challenges we have done within the SEN and SENELEC membership in the last few years, where the EU is looking for more things that make that alignment with international standards more difficult. Our position when the UK was a member state, but our position continuing within SEN and SENELEC, is that wherever possible, we should look to align with the international standard, because that's the business good practice. And that's the business good practice that gives the international and global market access. Our stakeholders, again, say to us, well, we want to use the international standard. We want that to be the British standard. If there's a slightly different market access requirement for international standard plus this in Brazil, international standard minus this in India, international standard plus this in the EU, and international standard plus not quite so much in the UK, then that's a better way to go than saying we have a European standard and a completely different British standard, because that drives market access apart and creates more divergence rather than enabling businesses to do their jobs. So, Torben, sorry, long answer as well. I'll stop there.
I just want to say I fully agree with you, and that's what our members tell us too. We would also like to have the international one. We are just bound by these challenges we have in the European standardization system, and that's why it is so desperate that we're trying to solve it. Because I mean, so we have created our problems ourselves. It's not to blame you.
And I think it's worth mentioning that the Confederation of Danish Industries and Danish Standards and the member state, we're trying to work together to solve some of these problems that we have with the harmonized standards, because if we have it, it should work. So we're trying to push that process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So maybe that would be an outcome of Brexit, that we will have to fix it in order to have the level playing field. Who knows?
That would be great. Let's have some more positive outputs of Brexit.
Thank you so much, Richard. I have another question. I don't know if Pauline, are you still on the line? Because I think you might be able to answer this one.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you so much. What do we mean by UK having the same voting rights as Turkey?
Yes.
Can you try to make it short?
Yeah, maybe Torben, you could have done that as well.
Sorry.
So when we have a vote in Sensenelec, the BSI has the votes they used to have. But if the vote fails, then there's a recount of the votes. And then the BSI votes, as well as the Turkish votes, are taken out of the equation. So then you're counting up again, and then to see if the vote turns out positive, that the standard is agreed upon. So that's basically it. But so it's only in the case where a vote is not going through. And somebody had been looking through a lot of cases and done some analysis on this, and it was presented that it's not like a really big difference, but it's also to make a difference since like Turkey is a member of Sensenelec and has been for a long time, but are not either an EU member or an EUS, what is that, EEA, like Norway and Iceland. So there are different categories of members already in Sen and Senelec.
And it means, if I may jump in, that the UK as a non-EEA country can't prevent the EEA countries adopting whichever standard they wish.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for doing it short. Also, Pauline, that's an accomplishment in itself. Just hang on, because I think I have another question. We mentioned that standards are voluntarily, and someone mentioned in the chat that that's not the case for the construction product regulation. So maybe you can put a few words on that as well, Pauline, when we have you through.
That's correct. That the current construction product regulation makes the standards mandatory to use when you're selling the product in the market, bringing it on the market. That regulation is going to be revised, and we're looking forward to see how that turns out. But the CPR, as it is now, is a completely different story than the rest of the standards, where usually for the CE-mærkning, you can use the standard to give you presumption of conformity, and some companies prefer that. It's easier to do. They have it all in the standards. Some certification bodies also prefer that, because then it's easy what to relate to. But in the regulations, you're free to do your documentation otherwise to show that you live up to the requirement and the essential requirements. And this is also the issue when we have no standards cited. We can have certification bodies who are doing different ways of showing this conformity to the regulation, and that makes, in a way, indirectly then different requirements in different countries if those bodies are not synchronized or not aligned. Maybe that was not quite as short, but I hope it's answered the questions.
It's okay. Thank you so much. Well, then I think I have a lot of questions here, which I think you will be the right one to answer, Mette. They are pointing in different directions, and yet they are pointing at some of the same issues. So I think there are some people out there seeing this that they need some dates when do we have to put the UK CE mark on? What if it's new developed products which are not CE marked at the moment, but they will be CE marked next year? So maybe it's a refreshment of what you said in your presentation, but I think we might have benefits of hearing some of the things twice, and maybe elaborate a little bit.
Okay. I mean, first of all, it's important to say if it has been placed on the market already now, either in the UK or in the EU, then no change. You can until the product ends its end user, CE mark will do for how long the product is alive, you can say. Then when it comes to when you have to apply the UCKA marking, I mean, you don't have to apply it before the 1st of January 2022. Until then, I mean, of course, if you place a new product on the market in the UK, you place a new product on the market in the UK, and you need to use, if you need to use a conformity assessment, you need to use a UK conformity assessment body, and you need to do the UK conformity assessment documentation and so on. Use the designated standard in the British regulation. Then the question becomes if you need to put it on the product. And there you have different dates. I mean, you don't have to put it physically on the product for the first 2 years, so not before the 1st of January 2003. There you can have it on the packaging or on the accompanying documentation. So there are like different ways to make it easier. In the beginning, the preparation notes from the UK government says, we will let you know in due time when you need to apply this. And they have become tighter on that to say now, you have a year. And then you have actually another year before you need to put it on the product physically. Does it?
I think it's it's good to hear some things twice, and yeah, I think you filled in a little extra on this one. I noticed indeed a lot of questions to this. Now I also have another question. I think that would go to you, Richard. Now I'm just simply reading it. Do you have any information if UK will adopt the harmonization process of the EU, or will they implement a different process?
Does that, Maria, do you think this relates to Haas Consultants and assessment and so on? Is that what you think the question is?
Yeah, that's...
I think probably it is. So if assuming that it means the process whereby the European Commission decides to cite or not cite a standard, then yes, UK government will run a process to decide whether or not to designate a standard. Now, they will not run that process on the 1st of January. They will designate all standards that are already cited. But after that, they will be developing a process. And we're working with them on what that process looks like for the standards that come through the CENELEC and the ETSI processes. And so essentially, we will provide information at different stages. So at a new work item stage, at the end of inquiry stage, so that they can see which standards are coming. And then when they have a reasonably advanced draft at the end of inquiry stage, they can carry out whatever administrative checks they want to do to see that when it comes to the final stage at ratification and at national adoption, they will be more ready to designate the standard. The view of UK government is that they do not want to look at the technical content of standards unless they feel it's absolutely necessary. So they do not intend to create a full process like the Haas Consultant process. They want to have a process that's lighter and places more trust in the experts who have created the standards, while at the same time giving them the assurance they need and the technical expertise they may want to have in particular instances where they have a reason to look at the standards. So in some instances, there are not many, they will put the standard to a group of technical experts within government to assess whether they think it meets the essential requirements or not. So the answer is yes, there will be, and UK government wishes that to be a lighter process than the Haas Consultant process, but they do not intend in general to open up the standard, but they will do if they feel it's necessary.
Thank you so much, Richard. I think this is what we are capable of answering at the moment. For those of you who gave us some contact information, we will answer your questions afterwards. But
yes,
I think that's it for now. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And Maria,
Yes.
it's up to you to
Thank you.
close the...
Thank you, Torben, for the Q&A session, and I really hope that the audience got something out of this webinar. We decided to keep it on 1.5 hours only in order not to tire you too much. You may have unanswered questions. Please revert to us, as Torben already said. Please also let us know if you need something more from Richard. I will not promise to use you too much, Richard, but you know you have already said to me that you would be available if Danish companies come up with very specific questions. We could reach out to you. So please let us know if there's any additional things you want. I would also like to thank you very much, Richard, for attending, being here, participating. And I'm sorry we couldn't host you in Denmark. It's a little bit boring to sit at home doing a webinar, but we're lucky to have you here. And I also want to thank Mette from Confederation of Danish Industries to be here today and share her information with us. And as you know, we're working all together, so please come back to us for any question. And last but not least, we have a small evaluation for you. So please look at it and fill it out. We would be very grateful to get your feedback, good or bad. Also, if you need something more from us, please let us know. It's very important if we need to improve our services to you. So again, thank you for attending, and I hope you got some relevant information. Thank you very much.